Psychopathy can be understood as a form of spiritual constipation. The capacity to metabolize love, grief, remorse, and nuanced emotion is blocked or severely underdeveloped. The inner channels that should carry these currents remain closed. In energetic terms, the higher centers are underactive or offline, while the lower centers remain dominant. The system runs primarily on survival, appetite, sexuality, and dominance, the classic triad of feeding, fucking, and killing. This is the reptile mentality in human form. It is not merely a psychological diagnosis, it is a low-bandwidth operating system. Perception itself is narrowed. The person is locked into a restricted band of reality, similar to how ordinary eyesight registers only a narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. The wider spiritual dimension, the subtle currents of meaning, presence, and living intelligence, cannot be properly registered. Complexity, depth, and higher feeling remain outside the available range. At the core of this condition is a fearful ego. Because it cannot tolerate vulnerability or the dissolution that real feeling requires, it hardens. Love becomes dangerous. Grief becomes unbearable. Nuanced emotion is experienced as threat. The system protects itself by remaining cold, strategic, and dominant. What cannot be felt must be controlled. This is why many of these individuals require external sacrifice. The pain, fear, or humiliation of others becomes a substitute current. Because nothing moves on the inside, energy must be extracted from the outside. In occult observation, this pattern is sometimes accompanied by a sense of something shadowing the person, a dense, cold, reptilian presence that seems to feed on the narrowed field. Whether understood as literal spirit or as the concentrated form of the blocked psyche, the effect is the same. The higher circuits stay offline, and the lower ones remain in charge. The reptile mentality does not stay isolated. It spreads unconsciously. People begin to normalize emotional flatness, mockery, and the quiet enjoyment of another's discomfort. What starts as an individual blockage becomes a collective atmosphere. The lizard brain, when dominant, does not only protect the organism, it begins to shape culture into its own image, territorial, predatory, and spiritually constricted. Some of this is developmental. Trauma and emotional starvation can freeze a person at this level, and with enough sustained work, the channels can sometimes reopen. But primary psychopathy appears to have a stronger biological and genetic component. In these cases, the limitation often proves highly resistant to change. The higher emotional and spiritual capacities remain largely inaccessible. The system stays locked in the lower bandwidth. What looks like strength is frequently just the rigidity of a closed system. What looks like power is often the need to extract reaction from the outside because nothing moves on the inside. This is the deeper cost of spiritual constipation. Not only the harm done to others, but the permanent narrowing of reality itself. The opposite condition is equally real. When the channels reopen and the higher centers come online, emotional metabolism becomes possible again. Feeling is no longer a threat to be managed or discharged. It can be received, held, and transmuted. What emerges is a greater range and refinement of emotion, not the dramatic swings of an unstable psyche, but a deeper, more nuanced palette. Love becomes less possessive and more precise. Appreciation grows sharper. Grief can move without destroying the vessel. There is more life in ordinary experience and less dependence on external stimulation or validation to feel real. In alchemical terms, this is the result of sustained inner work, the withdrawal of projections, the offering of residual claims, and the gradual reopening of the sealed channels. The fearful ego loosens its grip. Energy that was once scattered or harvested from others begins to circulate within. The being becomes more whole. Unity is no longer an idea, but a lived texture of consciousness. This is the quieter power of a system that is no longer constipated. It does not need to feed on the pain of others. It does not need to dominate in order to feel safe. Reality itself widens. The narrow band expands. More of the spiritual dimension becomes available, not as belief, but as direct perception and feeling. The difference between the two states is not merely moral. It is energetic, perceptual, and ontological. One remains locked in a restricted bandwidth, feeding on what it cannot generate. The other has undergone the slow alchemy that restores circulation, depth, and a living relationship with the whole.